and welcome to this workshop in this amazing conference, Stand Up to Racism conference, where we have 1,700 people who've been attending over the weekend. Our workshop this afternoon is called Debating Anti-Fascist Strategies, and we have a really powerful lineup of speakers. My name is Moira Samuels. I'm a member of Northwest London Stand Up to Racism, a Grenfell campaigner and a member of the National Education Union, and I'll be chairing the meeting. The panelists will be speaking for 5 minutes each, and then we'll open the meeting to any questions, to any contributions that people may have. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat or to raise your hand using the reactions button, which is at the bottom of your screen. Don't wait for the end of the contributions. Put them up in the chat as you see them coming up. So we have this afternoon our first speaker, Paul Mason, who is author of How to Stop Fascism, is a journalist and an anti-fascist activist. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, and thank you, Moira, and thanks to everybody for coming along. So I'm going to take as my brief the title of the meeting, Anti-Fascist Strategy, and not talk about anti-fascist tactics, because I think many of us on this call, I'm looking at some of the names, are well aware of what anti-fascist tactics have to be. I'm also going to take a global perspective, speaking about the generalizations I've made in this book that I've written, which is a kind of study of the modern far right. I think the first thing I want to say is that let's understand what their strategy is. We're no longer dealing with a kind of sad tribute band to Adolf Hitler, you know, people who simply wear swastikas in their armbands in their basements. Although in Greece, that's exactly what you were dealing with partly with Golden Dawn. What we're dealing with are people who, you know, they're not simply fantasizing about the return of a Third Reich. They're fantasizing about a global ethnic civil war, out of which emerges huge ethnic monostates, which are homogeneous in population. Some of them are a bit wary of saying how they get homogeneous, others not, because the obvious way that that happens is through genocide. When we talk about eco-fascists like Pentti Linkola, the recently deceased Finnish fascist, they think not in 6 million people they'd like to get rid of, but billions of people they'd like to kill. So this partly explains the kind of the long-term goal is to trigger a global meltdown of democracies and multi-ethnic states, out of which they triumph and modernity ends. That explains how they're acting in the short term. They have a kind of minimum program. They have a kind of short-term strategy. And I think it's this. We can see it in Brazil. We can see it in the USA. We're going to see it in France next year. The short-term aim is to put right-wing populists in power, and a special kind of right-wing populist who is overtly friendly to the themes and theories of fascism and is prepared to scour the insides out of democracy, enact authoritarian legislation to do what? To suppress the left, to suppress minorities, but also to make it very difficult for that right-wing populist leader to be removed by democratic means. That's what Trump did. It's what his supporters are trying to do. It's what Bolsonaro in Brazil is doing. And the function of the fascist groups here, let me say first thing, I'm not that bothered in most countries about the tiny fascist organized hierarchical groups, dangerous though they are. But the function of the fascist networks, the fascist activists and periphery, is to keep the right-wing populists in power by, first of all, becoming propagandists for a core set of ideas, the Great Replacement theory, violent misogyny, anti-state conspiracy theories. And then their modus operandi is to gather recruits to committing symbolic acts of violence, like, for example, all turning up at the Greek border in 2020 to try and attack refugees who are crossing it. So what should we do? Who is we? The left, liberalism, minorities, the labor movement, Democrats. I think the short-term thing is we've got to try and stop them achieving a moment of breakthrough, stop their ideas gaining respectable platforms as they have with the Great Replacement Theory on Fox News and via the candidacy of Eric Zemmour in France. We need, I think, above all the, the tactics, which many of us have done. We could talk the way through, the kind of pros and cons of turning up at this place and not that place. But above all, what I advocate in the book is that we adopt a mass cultural movement that celebrates and defends everything they don't like. And that's not just the left and Marxism. It's science, rationality, multi-ethnic cultures, feminism, democracy, and social justice. Some of those concepts are just liberal concepts. We need to be able to find allies to defend them all. Of course, that doesn't mean giving up our own politics, whatever they are. It does mean finding ways to land big blows on the fascists and their periphery, big blows. And what do I mean by big blows, big hits? The defeat of Trump was one. It was done by mobilizing people from the grassroots. If we can defeat Bolsonaro, and even better, get a Lula government in Brazil, that will be another big defeat. Another one would be a mobilization in France next year to defeat either the Zemmour or Le Pen candidacy. I think it involves the defense of the left government in Spain against the far right and right-wing coalition trying to attack them. It involves things like putting the Finns party in Finland into a box by forming a coalition government, which, like it or not, includes conservatives, liberals, and the far left. And it involves doing things like keeping the AfD in Germany out of power by insisting that conservatives in states like Thuringia stop collaborating with them. Another big blow would be to drive them out of the public social media through regulation and law, and to shut down their Telegram and social media platforms. To land these big blows, you need allies. The American left needed an ally called Joe Biden, unfortunately, and some other allies even less likable than Joe Biden. But it succeeded, and it did put the American far right onto a back foot from which it is now having to fight back via states, via mobilizations. I think what's the big missing thing to finish? The big missing thing, many of you on this call will be members of left organizations or aligned to the left. I am. The big missing thing is an international response to the fascists. Weirdly, liberalism has all these think tanks, CREX, ISD, Hope Not Hate. They function probably more internationally than the left is functioning as it tries to defeat and suppress the new fascism. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Paul. Our next speaker will be Sabby. Oh, I beg your pardon. Our next speaker will be Petros Constantinou, who is part of an organization called KEERFA in Greece, and he's a counselor in Athens. So welcome, Petros.
Okay, thank you very much to invite me in this panel. It's very interesting, and sometimes people worry if they see debating strategy on fascism. It's very welcome to open this discussion. I mean, Paul Mason make very good contribution about the situation of what's happening with fascism, and this is very good because it is getting attention to a lot of people and also political parties, especially on the left, who underestimate the threat of fascism. So it's very important. I think, first of all, we have to address the problem of fascism in the international dimension, but also on a real dimension, which I mean that fascism is a special political current. It is a force independent from the state and also from the traditional political parties. This is a force that aims to smash the organized working class and its institutions, I mean the political parties. It is aiming to destroy democracy, even in the bourgeois form, the parliament and so on. It is aiming to destroy everything that it is not on the acceptance of their racist supremacist, sexist, and so on values, let's say. So their tradition is Mussolini and Hitler. They are successful in the 30s to make these achievements. They offered a solution to a ruling class that was desperate in a period of crisis and in a period of rising working class resistance and revolutions. And I think that we are in a similar period, that we are living in a period of crisis. And this crisis means crisis of neoliberalism and also polarization, that the working class is there, but also the far right and the fascists are trying to stop this movement and get on the political arena. They're using not only street violence, but also the parliament, the elections. So in order to stop them, I think that, of course, we want to defend bourgeois democratic institutions like the parliament. We want to defend the trade unions and political party against their attacks. But I think that the best way to do it is not through collaboration with the bourgeois or the neoliberal parties, but we have to base ourselves on working class struggle. This is our experience in Greece, how we stopped the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn, that they developed in the period of crisis, in the period of rising left movement in Greece, of rising anti-austerity movement with huge general strike. It was very important to say it's a priority for the movement to stop them. And what the movement did in Greece, first of all, the mass general strikes against fascism, they were very important. There were 3 general strikes in Greece against fascism when they did their big breakthrough in 2012 and 2013. Also, we used the trial. We brought them on trial, and we used the trial to expose their crimes to hundreds of thousands of people who voted for them. 500,000 they voted for them, and they had 20 MPs. So in order to isolate them, to throw them outside of the institution of parliament, we needed to build this mass movement. This mass movement had also the priority to fight against racism and Islamophobia, because the governments, they were opening the way to the fascists through this kind of policy, closing the border, opening detention centers and concentration camps. So in our experience, this kind of strategy and tactic was very important. Referring to the bourgeois parties, I mean, the Party of New Democracy, they had their leader in the parliamentary group cooperating and discussing with the leader of Golden Dawn how to push common laws in the Greek parliament. They were invited in the national ceremonies. So there was no space to open discussion to attract the neoliberals on this front. Even with Syriza, there were a lot of problems. I mean, the leader of parliament, the president of the Greek parliament, when the members of Golden Dawn were in prison, they said the Greek parliament is not legal without the votes of the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn. So it needs a left and it needs a front united, space for the fascists on the street, in the parliament, in the media, no platform. So I think that this kind of methods, they were very crucial in order to smash the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn in Greece. And I believe that what happened in the 30s, I mean, the tradition of the Popular Front, when the left political parties, they aligned with the bourgeois party, with a far-right populist party. They formed a coalition there. So it was very important to be independent and to be very clear that we want to stop the fascists and open this. And the campaigns that were building internationally. And I believe it's very important what Paul said, that we need an international movement, a movement that unites against fascism, a movement that it is mobilizing. And this is what we try to do every year on the 21st of March using this date, but also we have to build an anti-racist movement internationally. Look what's happening with Europe, with Fortress Europe. It's the way how they are building their force, the forces of far right in Europe, and they are threatening democracy and civil liberties for all. So I think that we have to stick that our strategy should be aiming fascism as an independent threat. We have to unite the forces of democracy, of the left, of the working class movement to stop them, and we have to intervene in the institutions. No way, even to expose the police. We don't need the police to stop the fascism on the street. We need the thousands of people who are mobilizing. Our experience in Greece is that the police is covering them. Always they were covering them in their attacks. So we have to be independent from all these institutions of the state, not because we are revolutionaries and we want to replace them with workers' democracy, but always we have to leave space.
Can you finish up now, please, Petros?
Okay. Always we have to leave space for workers' movement, for the students' movement, for the mass movement to stop them. And our experience with the smashing of Golden Dawn, we smashed it before the court convicted them. And I think that we have to stick on this strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petros. I think lots of food for thought and lots of people raising their hands in the chat or on the attendees. Just to say to attendees, I can, as the chair, see the hands that are coming up, but also if we could apologise to some of the people who come into the meeting. I think you've seen the message that there was a glitch a little bit in the timetable, and people have come into the meeting when they wanted to go to the Love Football Hate Racism session. But please stay and join in the discussion, or the Zoom link to the other meetings have been given in the chat. So if you really want to attend those meetings, there is the Zoom link. So can I introduce our next speaker, who is Sabby Dhalu, who is co-convener of Stand Up to Racism. Welcome, Sabby.
Thank you, Moira, and thank you to the previous speakers, Petros and Paul. So obviously in Britain, we've experienced some success in defeating fascist organisations over the last few decades. But I think at the moment, electorally, fascists have been absorbed by a far-right, power-light, conservative government that is imposing, racist policies on the population, like denying institutional racism in the form of the Commission and Race and Ethnic Disparities Report, and policies and legislation like the Policing Bill and the Nationality and Borders Bill. So we have to be mindful of that. Fascists have been defeated, but we've got what I would say is a far-right, power-light government in power. So as a founder member of Unite Against Fascism and Stand Up to Racism, I'd like to share with you what I believe are the key lessons that enabled us to defeat fascist organisations. So the first lesson I would say is it's really imperative to challenge racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism, and whatever form of racism that fascists are using to build support. Because whether it was the British National Party embarking in Dagenham, or the English Defence League with spreading Islamophobic lies about Islam and Muslims, equating them with terrorism, or perpetrating lies about grooming that Muslim and Pakistani men are solely responsible for the sexual abuse and exploitation of young women, and that they only target white women. These are myths, and these needed to be challenged, and that's what we did. Some organisations argued that we must concede to those myths, that the far right had a point about some of those myths. They did not. So we challenged those myths, and that was crucial. Secondly, we centrally engaged the communities that were being targeted. So whether it was trade unionists, whether it was Jewish communities, the Muslim community were really under attack by the English Defence League and the British National Party, because don't forget, the BNP, the EDL, and the latest mobilizations we saw in 2018, led by Tommy Robinson, Islamophobia was the cutting edge of those mobilizations. We centrally engaged those communities in the leadership of our campaigns against fascist organizations, and that was successful because they mobilized their communities. And we got a lot of support in the areas that fascists were targeting. And I believe Petros, his organization KEERFA in Greece, also had the similar strategy, and that worked very well for them against Golden Dawn. And then thirdly, unity is the key lesson of history. We have to unite against fascist organizations. That means putting differences aside on all other issues. So for example, any differences on the Israel-Palestine question, Jews, Muslims, and others must put those differences aside and unite against fascism. Fourthly, it's important to mobilize against fascists. When there are fascist mobilizations, it's often very difficult to mobilize against them. Our mobilizations are small. We're under pressure to not mobilize. We're portrayed as troublemakers and so on and so forth. But in the end, people understand that the importance of mobilizing against fascists, and that means, we cannot let the fascists have the streets. And eventually people agree with us. People understand that, this is like what happened with the black shirts. If you don't mobilize against them, they will get support, and support for fascism could potentially snowball out of control. So in the end, on whether it was the EDL or Tommy Robinson led demonstrations, eventually we started off small, but eventually we out-mobilized them, and that demoralized them and defeated them. And then finally, I have to concur with points that previous speakers made, that we have to create an anti-racist culture, rock against racism. And now the role played by footballers in taking the knee is very important in building a mass movement and communicating an anti-racist message to a mass audience. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to hearing all your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabby, for keeping to time. Again, if I could remind people that the registration for this conference has been free, but if you would like to donate the cost towards the Zoom facilities, that'd be really appreciated. And the link is in the chat. And don't forget, if you have questions for any of our speakers, put them in the chat or start raising your hands. Our final speaker on this panel is Weyman Bennett, who is also one of the co-conveners of Stand Up to Racism. So welcome, Weyman.
I want to thank all the speakers that have spoken about fighting fascism today. And I agree that with all the speakers that fascism and racism poses a serious threat to us. Fascism, racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism poses the threat of organized groups challenging that. And I agree with the three classifications of them. You have classical fascists that organize trying to build mass groups like Mussolini and Hitler. You have the racist populists that usually characterize themselves as, as well. You have street movements like the EDL, and you also have authoritarian governments or people like Trump. If people remember the storming of the Capitol, at the heart of that were Nazis, were people that said that 6 million people were not enough. And I think that that is a significant shift. You've got large parties like the Republican Party, if you like, incubating or allowing far-right groups to grow. Now, the question is, how do we land these big blows? Firstly, I think we have to recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of our enemies. The truth of it is, when you look at the fascist movements like the British National Party, as mentioned before, they can suddenly burst through, or like Golden Dawn. But in order to stop their momentum, we have to understand what their target is. They're not ordinary political organizations. They do want to smash all democratic institutions in society. They require a certain momentum in order to go forward. And I think that we have to understand that providing we build a united front against them, we can talk about pushing them back. And I agree with the big blows. But we do have to understand what, like Hitler said, in terms of the purpose of them marching and combining is to turn their organization into a mightier one. And that means that we have to, I think, make sure that they don't get that forward momentum. I think this is the anniversary of, I don't know if Peter Paul remembers a demonstration called Welling when we shut down the BNP headquarters. I remember it well. I'm sure he was there. I'm sure the rest of us were there. I think that you have these big blows. You have Lewisham. you have Cable Street, you have Wood Green, you have certain times where you can begin to do that. And I think what's required then is the ability to make sure at the heart of whatever you build is the trade union movement, because the bulwark against fascism is in some sense class-based. You see, I think that it's very clear we have to say that the key part of the anti-fascist, anti-racist movement has been the alliance between the trade unions, the different communities that affected, the Muslim, the Jewish, the LGBT, different communities, the black communities, and actually anti-fascists that have been combined in able to do that. And I think we face difficult questions. Is it easy to have a kind of broad brush where you can unite with everybody? I think there would be problems if we tried to unite with Boris Johnson, to be honest, in that sense, because of the whole question of Boris Johnson is not a fascist. I believe that in some senses, there's been a change in the Tory party where it's kind of shifted because UKIP did so well in the last set of elections to incorporate elements of UKIP. But I don't believe it's become a far right party. What you have is versions in which it accepts racist populist arguments in order to have electoral things to go forward. That is an incubator, or that opens a door to far right organisations, but that's not something which I don't think which we can, that we're not able to stop. I think that the lessons of the last 20 years has been by being very clear about what fascist organisations are. I think that one of the things that people like Tommy Robinson suffered from was the fact that we're able to label him as a former BNP member. We're able to say that people like organisations like the BNP or various organisations are fascist. I agree also with the question that was raised by Paul about no platform. I think we should maintain no platform, but only for fascists. Not for everybody else, but for fascists. It's been very important that I think for the last 20 years, we made sure that they weren't able to build a cadre or get groups of people around them by denying them the right to be in our trade unions, by denying them the right to be in our universities and to get open press. I think that part of the idea that you can simply debate them and that will expose them, I think that's been exposed in France. The debating with Le Pen has actually led to their growth. And I think finally, I think we should learn the lessons of France. The biggest potential to break the fascist of Zemmour. No, Zemmour's not a fascist, he's a racist populist, I would say, even though he's supported by the Marine Le Pen thing. Whereas I believe that Marine Le Pen's organisation, where they've tried to detoxify themselves, still remains at core a fascist organisation with racist populist ends, with the aim of building a mass fascist party that will remove all forms of democracy. Can we stop these organisations? I think we can. I think the UN Anti-Racism Day, the idea of building an international movement against racism and fascism is important. Let's look at what happened in Vox inside Spain. The same thing has happened. Mass electoral breakthroughs with an attempt to break through in the street. A united front is built from below that breaks them, but that united front is based on activity and alliance, of course, with MPs. Of course, with social organisations, but the basis of that alliance is to break the momentum of the fascist. It's not based on how much we can convince the, the more senior figures of bourgeois parties to agree with us. It's based on the fact that you have to aim to mobilise the mass numbers to both confront them on the streets, but also confront all their ideas. I agree that fascism is a much more dangerous beast. To break the BNP in Barking and Dagenham, it's coming up to 20th, they didn't march on the streets. They put out leaflets. They used social media. I think we are going to face a much more hybrid form of fascism in the future. But the polarization is a polarization. As well as you've got far-right groups, you've also got the groups mobilized against them. I would believe that one of the biggest breaks against Trump was the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. In other words, you see the biggest mass movement you've seen for many years. So we have the potential, as long as we use the mass movements to challenge and break the fascists, to be able to bring that. But I do think ideologically, we have to be very clear about the enemies that we face. They're classical fascists, they're racist populist, there are street movements, and they're authoritarian regimes. And they're all different. And as long as we understand which one of them are, on what methods they're using, we can talk about breaking that. I'm the happy child of the Anti-Nazi League, to be honest, in that sense. I was depressed as a child. I remember the National Front, as Paul does, people should read his book, and his previous stuff, mentions the growth of those movements. But I'm left with this feeling. I had a slogan called Black and White, Unite and Fight. And I think we have to leave with that sense. There's a tradition that has broken the fascists on 3 different times. I haven't got a long time, so I'm going to shut up. I can do more. Right, I'm going to shut up, but I'll stop with that. That there's a tradition that can break them, and I'll let the chair and other people say. But I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Weyman. Or if each panel member will have 3 minutes to come back, and we'll begin with Paul. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. Let me be clear what I'm arguing. I'm not arguing that we call off demonstrations in Oxford because some liberal doesn't want to be on them, or anything like that. I'm arguing that the only time fascism was where it was a serious threat was ever defeated. It was not defeated and would not have been defeated simply by the workers' movement alone. And if that was true of when, in Germany, when 13 million workers voted consistently for Marxist parties throughout the Weimar Republic, how will it be true in America where there is no workers' party? It's just so what does the United Front from below mean? Let's be honest with comrades. If you're going to use this, that was never the slogan of the historic Trotskyist far left. Actually, they wanted a straight United Front of the workers' parties, the communists and the socialists and the rest. The United Front from below was the slogan of the German Communist Party as it led the German workers to defeat. That's what, because they couldn't even bring themselves to have a formal agreement with the leadership of social democracy. So it's a pathetic slogan. Now, let's look at what faces us today. If I was in the USA, I would have voted for. I would certainly have voted for Biden. In Greece, I would have enthusiastically voted for Syriza, even after they formed a coalition. Let's remember, it wasn't with a neoliberal party, it was a right-wing nationalist party. You have to, in some countries, you just have to have coalitions in order to defeat the far-right alliance. And next year, the French left and the Labour movement, once the left parties, because of course the left parties pathetically can't even find a single candidate, they're going to get knocked out unceremoniously in the first round of voting. The French left is going to have to vote Macron, which is a bit of a discussion for them because Mélenchon, one of the main leaders, keeps saying he won't do it. If you're going to vote Macron, would you rather do it with powerlessly saying, well done, Macron, here we are, the left, we have no control over you, we have no relationship with your party? Or would you rather try and create a mass organization against the far right? And incidentally, the problem with Zemmour, and I agree with Weyman, he's not a fascist, but the problem is the reason he's advancing actually because he's putting forward far more of the modern fascist agenda than Le Pen has, i.e. great replacement has become his key thing. So the question is, how do we extract a penalty from middle class and bourgeois parties, as we try to supersede them in the struggle against fascism? And I'll just finish on this, just because I think Finland is an interesting example. See, look, I don't want to unite with neoliberals, but unfortunately I have to, because long before I reach some kind of an agreement with the British Liberal Party, I've got actual formations as follows: Plaid Cymru, the SNP, the Greens. What are they? They're not workers' parties. So they have to, we have to try and reach agreements with their activists. And ultimately, in Finland, the main neoliberal problem in that government isn't the Conservatives. The main neoliberal problem in that government is the Social Democrats, the Workers' Party itself that leads the government. And I think the far left have been absolutely right to go in and you say, what have they delivered? They delivered a ton of stuff. So, go and actually Google what they've delivered and you'll learn something. It's a much more left-wing government than almost anywhere else in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Our next panel member to come back is, I've just got a blank here. Our next, sorry. Petros, sorry. Got crying children in the background. Petros, you have 3 minutes, thank you.
Okay, it's very interesting, this discussion and finally a debate. I wouldn't say that from the tradition of, let's say, Trotskyists, the issue is united front from below or from above. It's about united front. But at the heart of the united front was always the organized working class. And by organized working class, we mean the trade unions, we mean the political parties, Social Democracy, the Communist Party, or other parties, and so on. This is the majority of society. If we organize this majority, we can stop the fascists on the street. We can stop them when they try to get in workplaces. But also, there is a real question, why the fascists can rise. It's a problem of crisis of the system. It's the problem of crisis of neoliberalism. It's who is giving the alternative to millions of people who are demoralized or disillusioned by the politics of the parties that are governing. And sometimes the parties that are on the government, they're not only the bourgeois, they're also left parties, like Syriza in government. So it's very important to leave open the space of hope that the mass of the population, of the working class, they can see to an alternative. And on that alternative, most of the times, I would say 100%, the neoliberal parties are hostile to this. They're part of the problem. They're part of who creates the crisis, who creates mass unemployment, who is guilty for racism, for war, and so on. So we can criticize the leadership of social democrats, but it is not the same thing to align ourselves with neoliberal parties. And what it remains for the anti-fascist movement, it's where we can build the real force on the street to stop the fascists. And I think that the strategy should be the organized working class to stop them. The independence of the working class movement from these political parties, it's part of how they fight to defend their demands, their rights to survive in the system. And part of their rights is also the democratic rights. And the bourgeois parties, most of the times, they are compromising, even with the far right, even with the racist politics, and so on. So this kind of independence of the working class movement and of the anti-fascist movement is very crucial to leave open the space, what is hope and what is the alternative. I mean, I don't want to—
30 seconds, please, Petros.
To debate with Paul, because I know that he's trying to attract the majority. He's trying to build the hegemony of the anti-fascist movement, even on neoliberals. But I think we can have a biggest result if we depend on this kind of politics of anti-fascism, of anti-racism, and trying to attract, just are aiming to smash.
Thank you, Petros. My apologies for getting a bit confused at the beginning with your name. Our next speaker is Sabby. We'll come back.
Thank you, Moira. Yeah, so I just want to come back on this, Popular Front versus United Front argument. I think if anything is an illustration of the failure and the weakness of the Popular Front strategy, uniting with conservative or liberal or bourgeois governments, if you like, if anything is an illustration of the disastrousness of that approach, it is France. So you've seen, the Chirac government implementing the hijab ban and the niqab ban. And then you've seen the current Macron government that has, introduced a sweeping range of Islamophobic policies. And all of those policies have simply led to a growth in support for either Jean-Marie Le Pen and the Front National in the past, and now Marine Le Pen and the National Rally. And as people have said, Zemmour, because I think the reason why he's attracting support is because of the wave of Islamophobia implemented by Macron. So it's disastrous. It's demonstrably the case. In the last 2 decades, support for fascist and far right parties has grown in France. It's not been defeated. And you've had mostly conservative or liberal bourgeois governments. So challenging Islamophobia is absolutely crucial, and that's really what's missing. in the movement and in politics in France. And so I think, the United Front, if implemented electorally in France now, so if you had a United Front of the Socialist Party, Mélenchon, the PCF and the Greens, suddenly, if you had one left candidate, suddenly that left candidate would be neck and neck with Macron. So they would probably be in the top two, and they would have a good chance of winning the presidency, right? So I think it's mathematically demonstrable that a united front in France would be effective in defeating far right or fascist candidates. However, I would like to add that even a left united front, if successful, if they achieve power, they will not be successful if they concede to Islamophobia and if they also introduce Islamophobic policies, and there has been a tendency to concede to Islamophobia on the left in France. So I must stress, in addition to the United Front, that challenging Islamophobia or any form of racism is actually crucial to defeating far-right and fascist parties, because that has been the cutting edge of their support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabby, always on time. Giving our last speaker just that little bit more time that he probably needs. Before I bring in our last panelists, if I could just make a couple of quick announcements that on, bear with me please people, I've just got to find it. It's about Wednesday. I can't find it in the chat now, so I'm going to call in Weyman because I'm mindful of the time, and hopefully people can just hang on at the end for me to make the announcements about the demonstration on Wednesday and Saturday. Thank you, Weyman.
I want to start off by, I welcome Paul's argument, because his argument starts off with trying to build a mass movement against fascism. That's what we're talking about. And we all agree with that. I just want to say that. The question of how we get there, there is a debate about that. You see, our two strategies are this way. Our first strategy is we absolutely want a united front, like the anti-Nazi, which is that everybody joins in. In fact, to be honest, in this conference, Plaid Cymru speaking, the SNP speaking, you know, all the refugee council speaking, footballers are speaking, everybody's speaking. So let's be clear, what we want is a bigger united front in order to do that. So our two strategies, the things where we talk about united front is, firstly, we want to build a united front that actually confronts and doesn't allow the fascists to grow both politically and in every way. The second thing I want to raise is, which is what's more complicated about the racist populist, this is what's complicated. To be honest, it's not simply that you can do a single issue. Actually, you have to have a strategy of building an anti-racist atmosphere. What I mean by that is that's what Rock Against Racism did. It built an anti-racist atmosphere, and then therefore you have to confront every manifestation of racism and division. And that's why there's problems now, because when you talk about refugees, it actually splits the argument about, it splits the questions with the neoliberalist, because sometimes what they actually say is we want to build the borders, we want to do all those things. I think that part of building the anti-racist movement, not as an impediment about joining them, is that you have to be principled about anti-racism. You have to be principled about anti-Semitism. You have to be principled about Islamophobia. And actually what our experience has been that when you've done that in practice, that you have to build a united front that actively tries to do that. And there has been problems with automatically trying to do that with, I mean, I was speaking to some of our German comrades actually, who have been involved in the fight against the AfD when the question of Chemnitz came up. And there was an argument that you shouldn't demonstrate in Chemnitz. And I know you would support the demonstration in Chemnitz, but actually the alliance came under pressure because they talked about mass mobilization. Chemnitz was where they confronted the AfD, and actually I think it helped to pull back what the AfD did. There's constant tensions in the United Front. And what my argument is that what we have to have Centre United Front is on the organized working class and the organized willingness to challenge the fascists as well. When I talk about the question that's been raised about the danger is obviously what Paul has raised, the danger of fascists coming to state power. And I think there was a difference between the Brüning government that took place before the Nazis and the Nazis coming in, which smashed everybody. See, I don't agree with the question that what the government's doing now, they're the same as the Nazis. If the Nazis were in now, we would be having this discussion, but in a concentration camp about what went wrong. And that's the reason why
1 minute, please, Weyman.
We have to listen to the Holocaust survivors that spoke earlier on about what happened inside Germany. The SPD and the Communist Party refused to come together united front in order to smash the Nazis. That's why the Nazis came to power. But the only way that would have worked is if it had been an active united front, not based on just the questions of them coming together as an alliance, but actively breaking the brown shirts on the streets and ideologically pose as an alternative to the crisis about the system that was coming in. You'd have to do both things together. And I think that's what we're not at that level of crisis. We've seen a sniff of it in the Capitol Hill, but what I want to end up with is that UN Anti-Racism Day is a small seed of building that united front. So I want everybody to march, because what I agree with Paul is if we don't build that internationalist movement, if we don't learn from the defeat of Golden Dawn, then we are doomed to have that come again. And we've actively got to make sure that this generation doesn't face what the Holocaust survivors explained to us, the same crisis of the 1930s. There is a way answer. I do believe it's the united front. Let's carry on these debates and thank everybody for what they've said. And let's carry on building a bigger mass movement to try and challenge the fascists and the racists. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Weyman, and thank you to all our panelists. It's been a really, really inspiring debate and discussion. And the announcement that I wanted to make to finish off, it is in the chat, is that there'll be on Wednesday the 20th, there'll be a National Day of Action to oppose the Nationality and Borders Bill, No to the Hostile Environment. And on Saturday the 23rd, at 12 noon, there'll be Defend the Right of Asylum's protest called by Amnesty UK. And that again is in the chat for everybody. So thank you very much. And we hopefully will see you in the plenary at 5 p.m, where we'll join Diane Abbott, Gary Young, and a host of leading anti-racists for our closing rally. So thank you very much, everybody, and be safe.